My family literally burned $20 million on Christmas Eve because they thought my grandma was going senile. I'm the only one who didn't, and my life is never going to be the same. If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, stick around, because this ending is the ultimate I told you so. My name, Eddie Usher. I'm 29. And last Christmas, my dad literally looked me in the eyes and called me a moron for holding onto a gift from my grandma. That gift was a check for $5 million. He ripped his up right there. My mom shredded hers too. My sister actually tossed hers into the fireplace and filmed the whole thing for the gram. My brother just balled his up under the table like it was trash. I was the only person who tucked mine into my bag and said, "Thank you." The next morning, a bank manager locked the door behind us, sat me down, and said 4 words I'll never forget. My family spent the rest of the year trying to claw back what they'd laughed at, and the lengths they went to get it changed everything I thought I knew about my own flesh and blood. Before we dive into the tea, please hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to Christmas Eve, the very last dinner my grandma ever made. My grandma never locked her front door, not in 47 years. That December, the house smelled exactly like my first visit when I was 4. Wood smoke, fresh banana bread, and something kind of bitter underneath. I didn't have a name for that scent until later. I pulled up the hill in my beat-up Subaru with a bag of apples from my yard, and she met me at the door in her yellow sweater and that old-school apron. She kissed my forehead, holding my face like she was making sure I hadn't changed. "Tell me about your students," she said. She asked every Saturday, and she actually cared. We sat there with our mismatched mugs, and I told her about Daniel, this 3rd grader who's super quiet in class but writes these paragraphs that are honestly mind-blowing. She was all in, listening with her whole face. She asked what he needed, and I said, "Patience." She told me, "Then give him your Saturdays." I mentioned the vintage bed frame I scored at a flea market, and she joked that a grumpy farmer probably haunted it and wouldn't vibe with my books. Her hand shook a bit when she set her tea down. I just acted like I didn't notice. We knitted for a bit. She was working on something tiny and gray she wouldn't show me. Outside, her regular cardinal hit the feeder for 1 seed and dipped. She watched him like she'd been waiting for him. When I left, she slipped a thick envelope into my hand. It was 2 $10 bills for gas. She did this every month, and I never actually cashed them. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed because it wasn't about the money. I didn't know it then, but that was one of the last Saturdays we'd ever have. I drove home feeling good, but then my mom called. She never calls to check in, she calls to vent or to see what I have that she can take. She caught me 10 miles out of town. "Eddie, honey, you visiting the old lady again?" That's what she called my dad's mom, never grandma, just the old lady. I told her I go every Saturday. She sighed like I was being totally unreasonable. "She's fine, Eddie, she has her pension." My brother Grant was there too. I could hear him eating in the background. "Yo, Eddie, I need a ride to the shop Monday. Truck's acting up." I told him I had class, and he just went, "So, afternoon then." My sister Holland texted while I was still on the phone. She lives an hour away and only posts about her husband but never actually talks to him. "Hey babe, can you Venmo me $200 just for the week? I'll hit you back, promise." My mom kept rambling. "Christmas dinner. Your dad wants a roast. Make sure she doesn't spend hours cooking, Eddie. She gets tired and just sits there starring." Nobody asked if Grandma was okay. Nobody asked about her hip or why her hands were shaking. I realized I'd been waiting for anyone to care. Right then, on that slushy road, I made a silent choice. "See you Christmas Eve," I said. My mom's voice got all serious. "Don't let her talk you into moving in. She's got her pride, but she'll totally use yours." I hung up. My dad wasn't even on the call, but I could hear his voice in my head. He'd spent years telling me not to let her con me, but I'd never seen that woman lie to anyone in my life. The first thing my grandma asked me to do wasn't to save her life, it was to keep a secret. She told me in October while we were pruning rosemary. The light was that low, orange fall glow. She sat down, looking heavy. "You remember Dr. Ackheffer?" I nodded. "Pancreatic," she said. "Stage 4, I've known since July." It felt like the ground tilted. I didn't cry. I think I just already knew deep down. I asked about chemo, but she shook her head. She wanted her time at her table, not in a hospital. "Eddie, I'm 82. I've had a long, wild life." She squeezed my hand. I'm not sad, I'm just sorting things out. She gave me a sprig of rosemary and asked me not to tell the family. I want Christmas to be Christmas, she said. I don't want your father writing my eulogy at the dinner table. I want one more year of pretending he's the man I raised. Then she got that look in her eye. Besides, I have a few things to hand out first. It's gonna be an interesting Christmas. Fast forward to Christmas Eve. My family walked in with mental shopping lists disguised as love. My dad stomped in like he owned the place. He's been at the same factory for 30 years and doesn't realize he's about to be laid off. My mom came in right behind him, appraising the tree and counting the value of the ornaments. Grant brought his 18-year-old girlfriend and barely acknowledged Grandma. He just poked fun at my teaching job, asking when I'd get a real one. Holland was the worst, phone out, filming everything. Cozy grandma vibes, guys, check out this fireplace. She didn't even hug her. Grandma just moved slowly around the stove, watching them all with this calm look, like she wasn't surprised by any of it. She caught my eye and smiled like we were in on a private joke. Her best friend Margaret stopped by for a sec and whispered to me, "You're the only one she ever talks about, Eddie. You know that, right?" The radio was playing old Christmas songs, skipping like it always did. The turkey was hissing. Then Grandma pulled out a small wooden box and set it on the table. Nobody noticed. She stood up, cleared her throat, and waited for the room to quiet down. They kept talking, obviously. "I have something for each of you," she said. Grant and Holland just rolled their eyes at each other. She handed out 5 cream-colored envelopes. Mine was last. She touched my shoulder as she set it down. My dad opened his first because of course he did. His face went from "what is this?" to pure confusion to total anger. Inside was a check from First National. In her shaky handwriting, it was made out for $5 million. Grant saw the number and started laughing. "Grandma, is this a prank? We playing Monopoly now?" Holland giggled and held hers up like it was fake jewelry. My mom looked stunned for a second, but then my dad barked, "It's fake, don't be a sucker." He dropped it right into the gravy on his plate. My mom tore hers in half. "Mother, seriously, this isn't funny." Grant balled his up and flicked it under the table. And Holland, she walked right to the fire and dropped it in. I watched those 6 zeros turn black and curl into nothing. Grandma didn't even flinch. She just looked at me. I took mine, folded it once, and put it deep in my purse. "Thank you, Grandma," I said. She just gave me a tiny nod. Nobody else even saw. I drove home that night gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white because I knew everything was about to change. The snow was coming down heavy by then. My wipers had this weird, offbeat rhythm, right then left, that I'd found comforting over the last 4 winters. I counted the beats while I drove, just like my student Daniel counts his fingers when he's feeling overwhelmed. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. My grandmother had just watched 4 of her grandkids and her own son mock her to her face, and she didn't even blink. She only had eyes for me. She wasn't senile. She was the sharpest person I'd ever met. She read the Sunday paper cover to cover and took notes in the margins. She crushed me at bridge every other week, and on the weeks she didn't, she'd buy me a chocolate bar. She once caught a mistake on my federal taxes just from memory. And 2 weeks before Christmas in the garden, she'd asked me a question that felt random at the time. "Eddie, if you had $1 million, what would you do first?" I laughed it off. "I don't know. Buy supplies for my class. We're literally out of dry erase markers." She just nodded like I'd passed a test. At home, I put the check on my kitchen table under the yellow light. The paper was heavy. The security hologram moved like oil on water when I tilted it. The routing number was for First National Hollow Ridge, a bank I walked past every single day of my working life. The signature was hers, the same one I'd seen on every birthday card since I could read. I flipped it over. In that same slanted blue ink, she'd written, "For the one who still shows up on Saturdays." I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Outside, the snow did that thing where it makes the whole world feel muffled and far away at the same time. In the morning, I wasn't going to the bank to cash it, just to ask. The manager at First National had known me since I was 16, and I've never seen a human's face change color that fast. His name was Benedict Strom. He had a mustache from the 70s and a little plastic horse on his desk that I always figured was from a kid who'd grown up. He smiled when I walked in, but that smile died a second later. "Mr. Strom, sorry to bug you the day after Christmas," I said, sliding the check across. I just wanted to verify this. My grandma gave it to me and he looked at it. His face went from polite to unfiltered shock. He went the color of the inside of a white envelope. Eddie, he said, sounding like a doctor giving a diagnosis. Can you come with me a minute? He led me past the tellers, past the Christmas wreath on the vault, into a private room with no windows. He locked the door. Is it real? I asked. He sat across from me and folded his hands. He looked at the check, then at me, then back at the check. Eddie, he said, have you read the back? I told him I had. He took a massive breath. Your grandma came in the first week of November. She moved funds into a special account and had 5 of these drafted. I'm the one who put them on paper, Eddie. They are as real as the chair you're sitting in. I started counting backward from 10, the way I tell Daniel to do. I stared at that plastic horse on his desk. Ma'am, Benedict's voice got super professional. I'm going to ask you to stay seated. This is real, all of it, and this is just the start. There's a lawyer named Haverson who's going to be in touch with you. I'm not supposed to say more than that. I walked out of that bank with $5 million in my account and a gut feeling that the money wasn't even the biggest thing that would change my life that week. My grandma had been a millionaire longer than I'd been alive, and the only person in our family who ever bothered to ask about her money was the teller cashing her Social Security checks. I drove straight to her house, still in my winter coat, smelling like Benedict's office, toner and old coffee. She was in the kitchen with the pot on. She wasn't surprised to see me. She's never once been surprised to see me. You went to the bank, she asked. Yes. Was Benedict nice to you? He was terrified. She smiled into her old Cardinal mug, the one older than I am. She pushed a second cup toward me. Sit, sweetheart. I sat. Your grandfather left me $400,000 in 1998, she said. Plus the house and the garden. I was 55 and a music teacher for 30 years. I didn't know what to do with any of it. I'd never bought a stock in my life. So I went to the library. I read. I started writing letters to a guy in Chicago who wrote a magazine column I liked. His name was Mr. Smith. We wrote back and forth for 17 years. I never even met him, but when he died in 2015, he left me 40% of his firm. I set my coffee down. The cardinal on the cup stared at me with its one chipped eye. Grandma, I have like $40 million. Give or take a market day, she said, totally chill, like she was talking about the weather. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Because nobody ever asked, she said, zero bitterness in her voice. Your father asked once in 2003 if I needed him to manage my money. I said no, and he never asked again. He didn't ask to help, he asked to control. I'm not obliged to hand my life over to someone who confuses those two things. She squeezed my hand. I didn't give them money last night, Eddie. I gave them one last chance to ask me why, and they didn't ask. Took exactly 112 minutes for my family to stop calling that check fake and start calling it theirs. Benedict had to make a compliance call to my dad because of an old joint account from 20 years ago. He didn't give details, just said a wire had posted. That was enough. My phone, face down on the table, buzzed 32 times in 45 minutes. Holland's texts were a total flood. I need my check. I changed my mind. It was an accident. Eddie, baby, can we talk? I have to pay for my storage unit. You don't need that much, be fair. Grant's voicemail was way more aggressive. Give that back. That's family money, you little snake. You hear me? My mother did her performance cry on my voicemail, that soft sob with the hiccup at the end. Eddie, sweetheart, you don't realize what you're doing to this family. I've been so patient. I've never asked you for anything. I looked at my grandma. She was just eating toast, watching me like someone watching a storm they saw coming on the radar. I'm turning this off, I said. Good, she replied. The knocking started 40 minutes later. My dad. I saw his truck pull up. He walked to the door with that fake reasonable speed he uses when he's actually furious. Grandma stood up and walked to the front door, but she didn't open it. She just stood behind the glass. My father pounded on it and tried the handle. Mom, open the door. Richard, she said through the glass, it's December 26th. It's not a good time. You gave her $5 million. I gave each of you $5 million. 4 of you burned it. Richard, go home. She didn't even raise her voice. I'll see you when I see you. Then she turned the lock, the first time in 47 years. My dad stood on the porch for a long time, then finally left. Grandma sat back down. Well, she said, that started. The week she broke her hip was the week I stopped pretending I could keep her forever. It happened in January. She went out to feed her cardinal and slipped on some ice she couldn't see. She was out there for 40 minutes before Margaret from the bookstore drove by and saw the door standing open. The hospital wanted to admit her, but she wanted hospice at home. She'd already handled the paperwork months ago, and Haverson had notarized it. I took a leave of absence from the school. My principal, Mrs. Osgood, just looked at me and said, "Take all the time you need, Eddie. Come back when you're ready." I moved into her spare room with the old quilts. I set up a baby monitor so I could hear her. Theo, the gym teacher, who's a solid guy, nothing more, drove my stuff over in his pickup and didn't ask a single nosy question. My father visited once. He stayed for 20 minutes. He told my grandmother she ought to just let Grant take her back to his place. She just said, "Richard, I am home." He didn't come back after that. Every single night I read to her. She was a huge fan of Willa Cather, especially my Antonia, which had been a wedding gift from her own mother back in the day. I read slowly. She'd close her eyes. Sometimes she'd actually correct my pronunciation of some tiny prairie town name. Other times she just slept. The honey lemon water on her nightstand would literally freeze at the edges overnight because that radiator was ancient and the walls were paper thin. And every morning when I went to change it, I would notice with this small, frightened tenderness that my hand was smaller than hers had been, and it would never be that big. We had both shrunk in our own ways that winter. On a Thursday near the end, she asked me to open the top drawer of her dresser. Inside was a brass key on a leather loop. She put it right in my hand. "When Haverson calls you," she said, "give this to him. He'll know exactly what it opens." I said, "Grandma, not yet." She just said, "Eddie soon, and that's totally fine." My grandmother died exactly the way she lived on her own terms without making a scene in a room that smelled like old books and wool. It was February 3rd, 2026, a Tuesday, 5:47 in the morning. I know because I looked at the small travel clock she kept on the nightstand. It was the kind of clock with a ticking second hand, a clock that a teacher's husband had given her for their honeymoon in 1962, and it kept terrible time. But she had never replaced it. She had been quiet for 2 days. The morning before, she had squeezed my hand and said, "Eddie, I am so proud of you." She hadn't said a single word since. I had been dozing in the chair. I woke up because the furnace in the basement finally clicked off. It clicked off and the whole house got very, very still. And I understood in a way I didn't understand with my actual mind that she was gone. Her hand was in mine. It was still warm. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there for a while. I listened to the morning. The radiator knocked once. The cardinal came down to the feeder. He took one seed. He flew away. Then I called Mag. She was there within the hour. She sat beside the bed and held the other hand. She had been holding that hand since 1974. I called my father next. He picked up on the fourth ring. I told him. He was quiet for a second and then his voice cracked and I thought for a moment that he was actually human after all. Then my mother jumped on the line and her first words were, "When is the funeral going to be, Eddie? I have a thing on the 10th. I hung up. The funeral was that Saturday. My grandmother had left written instructions. She wanted her corn yellow sweater. She wanted to be buried beside her husband in the small cemetery behind the Lutheran church that she had never once attended. She wanted no eulogy from Richard. She wanted me to read a poem. They all showed up. They cried way too loudly. My father wore a black suit that didn't even fit him anymore. My mother clung to his arm. Holland filmed the whole procession from behind her sunglasses. I saw her post it later with a filter that softened the edges. The caption said, "Healing." I didn't film a single thing. I didn't cry until that night. I want to stop for a second right here. If you've walked this far with me, if you've ever lost someone who loved you more than you ever thought you deserved, give this story a like and in the comments below, tell me their name. I read every single one. I'm asking because the part that comes next is the part I wasn't sure I had the strength to tell, and having you here makes it easier. Stay with me. Let's go back. My father called the lawyer before the gravediggers had even finished their coffee. Haverson told me later because Haverson tells you things in his own time, and because he was, honestly, kind of funny. He said my father had left 3 voicemails by noon on the day of the funeral. All of them were asking when the will would be read. Grant came to my house the next evening. He walked in without knocking because we grew up in a house where nobody knocked. and he sat on the edge of my couch in his funeral suit and asked me without any preamble, "Do you know who she left the house to?" "No, Grant." "You were there every week. She must have said something." "We didn't talk about it." "Come on, Eddie." "We talked about my kids at school. We talked about her garden. We talked about bridge. I don't know what's in her will, and I don't care what's in her will." He looked at me for a long moment, the way Grant looks at people when he's trying to figure out if they're lying. Grant has never been a good reader of people. He took a beer out of my fridge without asking and left. Haverson called me the following Monday. He was exactly as I remembered from the one time I had met him at my grandmother's table. A tall, slow man in a gray suit with a voice like a cello string. "Miss Usher, your grandmother retained me for many years. There will be a reading of her will at my office. February 20th, 10 in the morning. All immediate family is named. I would like you to be there." "All right." "Eddie," he paused, "there is a safe deposit box here in my office that she arranged for. I will ask you at that reading if you have a key." "I have it." "Good." "Mr. Haverson, can I ask you a question?" "You may." "Did she tell you what's in the will?" He was quiet for a long time. "She did." "Is it going to surprise anyone?" He laughed once, a dry, short laugh. "Miss Usher, it will surprise every single person in that room except you and me, and even you, I think, a little bit." The day of the will reading was Friday. I put on a gray dress. I drove into town with an assumption that was entirely wrong. My father used the exact same words when he heard the will that he had used when he tore up the check. He said, "Is this a joke?" And then he said it again, a little louder, as if the room hadn't heard him. Haverson's conference room had a wood-paneled clock on the wall, and that clock ticked louder than any clock I had ever heard in my life. My father sat on one side of the table. My mother sat next to him with her hand on his sleeve. Grant sat across from them. Holland sat at the end, scrolling until Haverson asked her to put the phone in her purse. Mag sat beside me. I had asked her to come. My grandmother had specifically asked her to come. Haverson opened a dark green folder. He put on his reading glasses. He didn't look at any of us. "This is the last will and testament of Sylvia Marigold Usher, dated April 14th, 2022, witnessed by Margaret Eero and Dr. Priya Akaffer, notarized in my presence." He read the preamble. He read the list of specific bequests, the cardinal teacup to me, the bridge set to Mag, the soldered star to the Lutheran church, the piano to the elementary school. My father's jaw was already set. "The principal remainder of the estate," Haverson read, "comprising the family residence at 114 Linen Hollow Road, the surrounding 23 acres, all investment accounts, and all remaining personal effects valued at approximately $40.2 million net of the 5 gifts already distributed." The clock was very loud. "The testator leaves the entirety of this remainder to her granddaughter, Eddie Rosemary Usher." Nobody spoke. The clock just ticked. My father's face didn't change for a full 3 seconds. Then he stood up. "Is this a joke?" "Mr. Usher, please sit down." "Is this a joke?" "It is not a joke. It is a legal document. Please sit down." My mother let out a small sound, a sound like a teacup being set down way too hard. Grant's eyes were on me. Holland had already pulled her phone back out. Haverson read the attached reason clause in the same steady voice. "I leave this to my granddaughter, Eddie. She is the only one who visited me on Saturdays. She came for no reason other than love. She cared for me at the end of my life. She never once asked what I had." My father sat down. He just stared at the table. Mag reached over and took my hand under the table. I held on. The lawsuit arrived in the mail 4 days after the will was read, and I knew before I even opened it which of them had been the one to type it up first. It was a heavy manila envelope. I smelled the paper. I don't know why, stress does strange things. The paper smelled like paper, and the lawyer's office it had come from smelled like toner and old leather. And both of those smells came through perfectly. The lawsuit was filed by Richard, Linda, Grant, and Holland Usher Briggs. The charge, undue influence. They were actually claiming I'd manipulated a sick, elderly woman into handing me her entire estate. I sat on my kitchen floor and just laughed. It wasn't a ha-ha laugh. It was that unhinged laugh you make when the only other option is throwing a plate at the wall. I called Haverson. He'd been waiting for this. "I'll represent you for free, Eddie. I owe your grandma 30 years of trust." Let's finish what she started. I called Theo next. He was in his driveway scraping ice off his windshield and picked up on speaker. Should I just settle, Theo? Just give them a cut? He stopped scraping for a second. Eddie, you didn't do anything wrong. Your grandma knew exactly what she was doing. Giving in now would be the ultimate disrespect to her. Okay, I said. Okay. That was the whole call. That's the kind of ride-or-die friend Theo was. My dad sent an email the next morning. Subject line, family meeting. Text, Eddie, we need to sit down. This has gone too far. Dad, I just forwarded it to Haverson. He replied for me super polite, super professional, basically telling them to talk to his office and leave me alone. Holland started posting these vague booking videos. She'd sit in her car with no makeup, talking for 7 minutes about a family betrayal she couldn't talk about for legal reasons. Her followers ate it up. Stay strong, queen. Family is everything. I'm so sorry, babe. I watched 2 of them. I skipped the 3rd. My grandma had been gone for 18 days. The case wouldn't even hit a courtroom until October. Haverson told me probate is slow, but contested probate is a snail's pace. I'd have to live for 7.5 months with my family's names legally tied to mine in a fight. I went back to school on Monday. Daniel was so hyped to see me. As for that safe Grandma gave me the key to, it didn't have stocks or deeds. It had the receipts that proved she'd been paying attention the whole time. Haverson drove out to the house with me on a Saturday in May. The lilacs were blooming. He walked through the rooms with so much respect. The safe was in the back of her closet, hidden behind a row of cardigans. He watched me turn the brass key. Inside were 3 things. First, a thick legal folder. The will, the notarized papers, and 3 separate mental capacity checks Dr. Ackafer had done over the years. Every single one was clean, dated, and signed. Haverson gave a grim little smile. Your grandmother understood litigation, he said. Second was a bundle of letters, every single birthday card I'd ever sent her, starting with a crayon drawing from when I was 4. She kept them all, labeled by year in pencil on the back. Third was a green leather album, bound with a shoelace she'd replaced at least once. I opened it on her bedroom floor. It was a journal, well, a log. Each page had a date and a few words. February 5th, 2015, Eddie came. We read about the Nebraska prairie. She cried at the part with the plow. October 22nd, 2016, Eddie came, brought apples, helped with the gutters. August 19th, 2018, Eddie came, exhausted from her first week of teaching. We both napped. Every Saturday I'd visited. Every single one, going back a decade, 487 entries. On page 112, there was a faint tea stain. Her note said, Eddie brought pie. I spilled much laughter. I cried for the first time since the funeral. I sobbed into my sleeve on that floor while Haverson stood in the hall, kindly pretending to look at the view. I wasn't going into that courtroom alone. She had counted every Saturday. The judge handling the case had actually gone to high school with Grandma in 1962. She mentioned it twice before we even started. Judge Bernadette Ames usually recused herself if she actually knew people, but they were just classmates in a tiny group of 51. That counted as an acquaintance. She could hear the case. My family's lawyer didn't object because he knew he didn't have a leg to stand on anyway. Haverson was a rock. He walked the judge through the will, the medical checks, and the affidavits. Dr. Ackafer took the stand in a navy suit and spoke with total precision. She evaluated Grandma 3 times, once for the signing, once as a follow-up, and once in 2024 because Grandma insisted on it. All 3 proved she was 100% sharp. Mag went up next, wearing a silver pin Grandma gave her. Your Honor, Sylvia and I played bridge every Wednesday for 40 years. In her last week, she remembered a hand I messed up in September of 1987. She was still roasting me for it. Mag looked right at my dad. She wasn't influenced by anyone. She was the most unpersuadable person I've ever known. Then the family lawyer grilled me. I'd rehearsed, but I didn't even need it. Miss Usher, did you ever suggest how she should split her estate? No. Did you discuss her finances? No, I didn't even know she had money. Did you ever encourage her to favor you? No, sir. Then why, in your opinion, did she leave you everything? I wasn't ready for that one. I looked at Mag. I looked at the empty seat next to her where Grandma should have been. I came because it was Saturday, Your Honor, I said. That was the only reason. The judge wrote something down. I couldn't see it. She looked up. The court finds the will valid. The contest is dismissed. Plaintiffs will cover the defendant's legal fees. Haverson squeezed my shoulder. I didn't look at my dad. But my dad called me his worst daughter in front of a reporter, and by Tuesday, the local paper had it printed in a massive pull quote. It happened in the marble hallway outside the courtroom. I was walking with Haverson when my dad came out of the restroom and just lost it. "You are the worst daughter I've ever had, Eddie." His voice echoed everywhere. 3 people turned their heads, including a girl with a press badge. She made a very deliberate note. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking. Grant followed us. "Don't you feel guilty?" he hissed behind me, not even a little. I stopped and turned. Grant had been my big brother for 34 years. He'd pushed me into a pool at 6, helped me move 3 times, and borrowed money he never paid back. He'd shown up to Thanksgiving without calling and stood at Grandma's coffin with dry eyes. "No, Grant," I said, "not even a little." Holland had been live streaming inside the courtroom. The bailiff told her twice to put the phone away, and she ignored him. Her video got yanked by the platform within an hour for violating court policy. She lost 7,000 followers in one afternoon. She crossed the line from grieving granddaughter to embarrassing train wreck in front of the very audience she was trying to impress. I went home and drank tea in my cold kitchen. Theo brought over dinner he definitely didn't cook. The paper ran the story Tuesday. The headline was professional. Probate court upholds contested will. But the body of the story was brutal. There was my dad's quote in a box on the second page, and a tiny detail I missed at first. Mr. Usher was laid off from his factory job earlier this year. The plant announced its closure in March. It wasn't personal. It was just a reporter doing her job. But in a small town, people remember everything, especially when you're mean to a dying woman. My mom's spa started tanking in November. Not all at once, but the regulars just stopped booking. The woman who owned the flower shop, a friend of Grandma's, walked past the spa for 3 weeks without even looking in. My mom called me in December, crying, asking for help. I said no gently, and she hung up. Grant's construction office got repossessed in January. He was 3 months behind on rent. The landlord had been patient because he knew our dad, but eventually he had to file. People read the legal filings in the back of the paper. My dad didn't find another job. He applied everywhere, but got 0 calls. At 58, after 30 years at one plant, he was basically a dinosaur in the job market. My mom moved back to Ohio with her sister. My dad stayed in my childhood home, but he didn't invite anyone over. And then there was Holland. That news story got picked up by a regional blog, which led to a comment thread, which led to someone messaging Holland's husband, Marcus, about some credit card debt. Marcus checked. He found $80,000 in debt she'd been hiding. He filed for divorce in April. Holland moved to Ohio with Mom by May. She'd lost 12,000 followers, and all the leverage she thought she had. Theo and I were at his table when I got the text about the divorce. "You didn't do this," he said. "I know," I replied. "We just sat with it." The one thing my family never learned was that Grandma had been quietly supporting the local school for 40 years. I found out in May while going through her desk. I decided not to sell the house. I couldn't. I told Mag she could use the front 2 rooms for a second bookstore location. She cried, then started bringing over boxes. We were clearing out drawers when I found the notebook. Small, soft leather bound with that old shoelace. It was hidden behind a drawer liner, the kind of place you use when you don't want to get caught being kind. I opened it. Every page was a different year. Each year had a single line. 1985 milk program, $840. 1986, milk $900. $1,987, milk $950. Library $400. It went on like that for 40 years. The very last entry was from November 2025. Milk, books, and a brand new set of drums for the music room. The running total at the bottom, written in her steady hand, was $284,600. Briar Hollow Elementary, my school, the place I taught. The school where Daniel, my 3rd grader who wouldn't say a word in groups, drank a carton of milk every single lunch because it was part of what the school called the nutrition program. Fully funded every year by a private, anonymous donor nobody had ever met. I sat down on her kitchen floor with that notebook in my lap and didn't move for an hour. A pressed oak leaf fell out of the back cover. Underneath it, she'd written, Benji's first day, October 1984. I didn't know who Benji was, so I asked Mag later. Mag looked at me for a long beat and said, Your father. He was a kindergartner. My grandmother had started feeding that school the year after her son started attending. She had fed it through his entire childhood, his teen years, his graduation, his marriage, his kids, and his grandkids. She had fed the school that fed us, and she never told a single one of us, not even the granddaughter who spent her own days teaching in that building, not knowing she'd been kept in dry erase markers for a decade by the woman she loved. My mother sat at my kitchen table in February, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look like she was performing. She'd shown up without calling. She'd taken a bus from Ohio and walked the last mile from the station through the slush in a coat that had been expensive 6 years ago but was now just a coat. She knocked on my door the way a stranger knocks, twice, soft. I let her in and made tea. I didn't say much. She had lost weight, but not the loud, look at me way she used to diet. She'd lost weight the way grief does it for you. Her hands were shaking on the mug. I read her letter, Eddie, she said. The one Mr. Haverson gave me after the reading. I didn't open it until last month. I couldn't. Okay, I said. She tried to take a sip but set the cup down because she was crying silently, this new, quiet way. She said she remembered a specific Tuesday in 1994 before you were born. She'd come over and I'd been short with her. She said she understood. Her own mother-in-law had been difficult with her, too. She didn't want to pass that down. And then she wrote, I forgive you, Linda. I have forgiven you for 30 years. My mother put her head on her arms right there on my table. I let her cry. I didn't pat her shoulder. I didn't say it was okay. I just made another pot of tea. When she finally looked up, her makeup was gone and her face looked the way it had before I was born. For a second, I was looking at a version of my mom I'd never met. Eddie, I would never ask, but the spa, $100,000, I could save it, I'd pay it back, I really would. I looked at her, I didn't feel angry, I didn't feel anything sharp, just a kind of tired tenderness. Mom, I said, I'm not giving you money. She nodded, she'd expected that. But I'm going to set up a fund, I said, in her name for college, for any grandchild I might have someday and for any kid in Hollow Ridge who needs it. That's what I'm doing with her money, that's what she would have wanted. She nodded again, stood up, and gave me a tiny 1-second hug. Then she left. I'm not mad anymore, Mom, I said at the door. I just don't know you. She didn't turn around, but she nodded. I gave notice at Briar Hollow on a Tuesday, and by Friday I'd rented a small cottage in a Maine town I'd never even visited. Mrs. Osgood didn't try to stop me. She'd known me for 4 years. She'd seen me come back from leave, go through a trial, and keep teaching a class of 9-year-olds like the ground wasn't shifting under my feet every morning. She accepted my resignation with a dry nod. You'll be a great teacher wherever you go, Eddie. You already are. I set up the foundation with Haverson, $20 million for the Sylvia Usher Scholarship Fund. It would cover tuition, books, and milk for any student in Hollow Ridge County from elementary through college. Haverson actually wept quietly in his office when I signed the papers. It was the only time I ever saw him cry. He had loved her. I'd always known that. I didn't sell the house. I couldn't. I gave Mag the right to use it for the rest of her life for the bookstore. She named the new branch Sylvia's Second Reading and painted the sign herself. I applied for a 4th grade spot in Newbury Cove, Maine. I picked the town out of a road atlas because the name sounded like something my grandma would have liked. I didn't visit first. I just did a phone interview. They offered me the job 2 days later for $51,200 a year, the exact salary I'd always had and the one I intended to keep. My father called once in June. I let it go to voicemail. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. He said he had things he wanted to say. I listened to it 3 times, then wrote one email. Dad, I'm not going to stop loving the person you should have been, but I can't keep writing the script for you. Take care of yourself, Eddie. I didn't send the versions where I tried to explain more. I didn't send the version where I forgave him. I couldn't lie to him, even now. I packed what fit in my car, and it did fit. The first cup of coffee I had in Maine was the worst coffee I've ever had, and I laughed out loud in the parking lot. I'd driven 2 days through New Hampshire and Vermont into Maine. My Subaru had a cough in 4th gear I'd been ignoring for 3 years. I had the yellow sweater in the front seat next to me because I couldn't bear to pack it in a box. I stopped at a gas station south of Augusta with a coffee pot that looked like it had been there since the Carter administration. I bought a cup. It was objectively a disgrace. I stood in that parking lot and laughed, a real, genuine laugh I hadn't made in a year, and I totally startled a guy putting air in his tires. I got to Newberry Cove in the late afternoon. It was small, one main street, a post office, 2 diners, and a bakery that was closed on Tuesdays. The cottage was on a bluff a half-mile out, gray clapboard, a weathered porch, and 2 rocking chairs. I found the key under the flower pot. The place smelled like cedar and the ocean. It was empty and quiet. The kitchen had a cast-iron stove I didn't know how to work yet. The living room had a window facing the Atlantic and a floor that creaked when I walked. I took the yellow sweater into the living room and draped it over the arm of the one green chair that was already there. The sleeve hung over the side just like it used to on my grandma's kitchen chair. I just stood and looked at it for a long time. In the mailbox that evening was a single envelope, Mag's handwriting. Inside was a card and a brief letter, Eddie. Sylvia knew you'd end up somewhere like this. She told me 10 years ago. She said, Eddie is a coastal soul. It just hasn't told her yet. Welcome home, Mag. By the next June, I had a 4th grade classroom that faced the Atlantic and a yellow cat who believed my grandmother's sweater belonged to him. The classroom was on the 2nd floor of the Newberry Cove Elementary School, a brick building from 1936 with floors that squeaked in 8 specific places, all of which my students learned to skip over on the way to the pencil sharpener. My class had 18 students. One of them was a quiet girl named Rosie who did not speak in group work. I gave her patience. I gave her Saturdays in the form of extra 20-minute conversations after school on Tuesdays. By May, she started to raise her hand. The first awards of the Sylvia Usher Scholarship Fund went out in April. 47 students. I read every single application. 2 of them were children from the Briar Hollow Milk program my grandmother had been paying for since before they were even born. I cried quietly over both of those files. I signed both approvals. Mag drove up in early June with a mason jar of jam from the garden. She stayed for 3 days. She sat on my porch and read a paperback and did not talk more than was required. She was 80 years old. She looked on my porch like a woman who had decided to live to 100 out of pure spite. Richard sent me a birthday card on the 14th of July. It was the first birthday card he had sent me in 10 years. The card was generic, "Happy birthday, daughter." On the inside, in his cramped handwriting, he had written 4 words, "I hope you're well." I did not write back. I did not tear it up either. I put it in a drawer in the kitchen. I do not know why. I think I will know someday. The cat arrived in late June, skinny and yellow with a torn ear and a steady, skeptical way of looking at a person. He walked in through the screen door I had not properly latched. He got right onto the corn yellow sweater on the wingback chair. He went to sleep. I did not have the heart to move him. I named him Cather. He slept on the sweater every night. Every morning I had to ask his permission to borrow it. He would look at me with a single half-open yellow eye, as if he had inherited the memory directly, and was only tolerating my use of it on loan. On a Saturday in August, I sat on a porch that belonged to me and wrote a letter that didn't need to be mailed. The sun was going down over the bay. It was going down 10 minutes later than it had gone down behind my grandmother's hill. I had been keeping track of that for some reason. I had sat through all 10 minutes of it that night, the way you sit through the credits of a film you don't want to end. The letter was to her. I told her about the classroom, about Rosie, about the 8 squeaky floorboards, about the day the principal brought donuts, about Cather and the sweater, and the way he looked at me. I told her I had figured something out. I had not won because I had money. I had money now, and most of it was not mine, and never would be. I had won because I had known when it mattered how to sit still with a person who was leaving, because I had come on Saturdays for no reason. Because I had put the check in my purse instead of the fire. Because when she had asked me, sitting in her garden in October, what I would do with $1 million, I had said I would buy dry erase markers for my class. And she had looked at me the way a person looks at an answer they have been waiting their whole life to hear. I folded the letter. I put it in the small wooden box she had kept by her chair on Christmas Eve, the one I had brought with me to Maine. I closed the lid. I stood up. Cather, through the open window, looked at me with the patient disdain of a creature who was ready for his dinner. "Coming," I said. I went inside. If this story has reached you, if anywhere in your life there has been someone who loved you more than you knew how to receive it, please tell me in the comments below. Tell me their name and what they taught you about quiet kindness. I read everyone and I carry them with me. If you would like to hear another story about boundaries, inheritance, and the women who choose to walk instead of stay, the next one is waiting for you in the description, and it begins with another check. Come with me.